The recycled air in the cabin tasted of regret. Lena Park pressed her forehead against the cool, vibrating plastic of the window, watching Seoul shrink into a glittering web below. Each light was a life, a story, a world she was leaving behind. One light in particular, a beacon in a penthouse that overlooked the Han River, burned a hole in her memory. His light, Julian's. Leaving him had felt less like a choice and more like a limb being severed to save the body. The phantom pain was already unbearable. She had bought the cheapest one-way ticket she could find, a red-eye flight to a city she'd only seen in movies, a place where no one knew her name or the shadow that had fallen over her life. She was in economy, wedged between a snoring businessman and a woman who smelled faintly of kimchi and mothballs. It was a world away from the silent leather and champagne bubble she had briefly inhabited. The contrast was a physical blow, a constant nagging reminder of what she had run from, what she had lost. "Excuse me," a voice, sharp and condescending, cut through her thoughts. Lena looked up. A flight attendant with a severe haircut and a painted-on smile stood over her. "You need to put your seat upright for takeoff." Lena glanced at her seat. It was already perfectly upright. "It is." The attendant's smile tightened, becoming a weapon. "I'm sure you think it is. But there are regulations." She reached over, grabbed the lever, and yanked it with unnecessary force, jarring Lena's entire body. The seat didn't move an inch. "See?" Lena's voice was quiet, tired. She didn't have the energy for a fight. The attendant's eyes flickered over Lena's simple clothes, the worn jeans, the faded hoodie, a flicker of judgment. "Just make sure it stays that way." She then turned to the man in the first-class cabin, visible through the curtain, and her voice transformed into pure honey. "Can I get you another glass of champagne, Mr. Kim?" The injustice of it, so small and yet so vast, was a spark on the dry tinder of Lena's frayed nerves. It wasn't about the seat. It was about the assumption, the immediate categorization. "You don't belong here. Your kind doesn't fly first class." The words weren't spoken, but she heard them all the same. They echoed the very fears that had sent her running from Julian's world, a world where she would always be an outsider, a curiosity, a girl from the wrong side of the tracks who had somehow landed in the king's palace. The attendant's sneer was just a microcosm of a much larger, more dangerous truth. A tear, hot and angry, escaped and traced a path down her cold cheek. She wiped it away furiously, turning back to the window, wishing the plane would fly faster, wishing it could outrun a memory, wishing it could outrun him. But she couldn't. No one could outrun Julian Cho. 3 months earlier, the world had been a simple, if exhausting place. Lena's universe was the 5-block radius between her tiny apartment, the cafe where she worked, and the community college where she took night classes in graphic design. Her life was measured in tips earned, rent due, and assignments completed. It was a predictable, grayscale existence, and she was too busy surviving to wish for color. Then he walked in. It was a Tuesday. The lunch rush was over, leaving behind the ghost of frantic energy and the scent of burnt espresso. Lena was wiping down the counter, her mind a million miles away, sketching logo ideas on a mental canvas. The bell above the door chimed, a familiar tinny sound. She didn't look up. "Be with you in a second," she called out, her voice automatic. There was no reply, only a silence so profound, so heavy, it felt like a presence in itself. The air in the small cafe shifted, charged with a sudden, inexplicable tension. Lena finally lifted her head, her gaze snagging on the man standing just inside the door, and the world stopped. Julian Cho did not feel the world stop. He felt it tilt on its axis, pulled into the orbit of the woman behind the counter. He had come into this nondescript cafe on a whim, a detour from his rigidly scheduled life, guided by an impulse he couldn't name. His driver was waiting outside. His second-in-command, Marcus, was likely already pacing in the boardroom, waiting for a meeting about port logistics and syndicate territory. None of it mattered. He saw her, and a lifetime of discipline, of emotional lockdown, shattered into a million pieces. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, not in the way of the polished, perfect women who moved through his circles. Her hair was a chaotic tumble of dark waves tied back with a pencil. A smudge of chocolate marked her cheek. She wore a stained apron over a plain t-shirt, and yet the sight of her was like a punch to the chest, stealing the air from his lungs. It was her eyes. They were a deep, soulful brown, weary but alight with a fierce intelligence that seemed to see right through his tailored suit, his reputation, his carefully constructed armor. In that moment, Julian, the man who controlled half of Seoul's shipping, who could make politicians tremble with a single phone call, who had inherited an empire built on shadows and fear, felt a terrifying, exhilarating lurch in his soul. It was a feeling he had only ever read about, a concept he'd dismissed as a weakness for lesser men. Connection. Instant. Irrevocable. He had to have her. It wasn't a thought, it was a decree issued by a part of him he didn't know existed. The desire was primal, absolute. He wanted to know the story behind the weariness in her eyes. He wanted to be the one to put a genuine smile on her lips. He wanted to own every breath she took. The possessiveness of the thought was startling even to him, but it was there, undeniable and ferocious. Lena stared back, her initial annoyance at the silent customer slowly morphing into something else. Unease. The man was a paradox. He was dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her tuition for the entire year, tailored so perfectly it seemed fused to his skin. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and dark hair swept back from his forehead. But it was his stillness that was so unnerving. He watched her with an intensity that felt like a physical touch, his dark eyes cataloging every detail of her face, her posture, the worn fabric of her apron. A thin, white scar cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection that only made his face more compelling, more dangerous. "Can I help you?" she finally managed, her voice a little sharper than she intended. Her instincts, honed by a life of keeping her guard up, were screaming. This man was not a regular customer. He was trouble, wrapped in bespoke silk and smelling of money and something wilder, something untamed. Julian took a step forward, his movements fluid and deliberate. The silence had stretched for an eternity. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that seemed to vibrate in the air. "I was just admiring the artwork." He gestured vaguely to the wall behind her, where a few of her own charcoal sketches were pinned up. It was a lie. He hadn't even noticed them. He was only looking at her. Lena's eyes narrowed. It was a line, and a bad one at that. "They're not for sale." "A shame," he murmured, his gaze never leaving her face. "Everything has a price." The casual arrogance of the statement grated on her. It was the mantra of the rich and powerful, the belief that the world and everyone in it could be bought. "Not everything," she shot back, her chin lifting in defiance. "And not everyone. Now, are you going to order something, or are you just here to block the door?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a subtle, captivating shift in his expression. He was amused, not offended, but intrigued. It was as if he'd expected her fire, welcomed it even. "Americano," he said, his eyes still locked on hers. "Black." "Of course," she muttered under her breath, turning to the machine with more force than necessary. She could feel his stare on her back, a tangible pressure. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she tamped the coffee grounds. She was flustered, angry at him for making her feel this way, angry at herself for reacting. He was just a man, an incredibly intense, ridiculously handsome, and probably dangerous man. She slammed the cup down on the counter, splashing a bit of the hot liquid over the side. 3,001. He didn't even glance at the register. He pulled a crisp 50,001 note from a slim, leather wallet and placed it on the counter. "Keep the change." "We have a tip jar for that," she said, pointing to a glass jar filled with crumpled bills and coins. "I'm not tipping you. he said, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. I'm making an investment. Lena blinked. An investment in what? Overpriced coffee? In a future conversation. He picked up the cup, his long fingers brushing against hers. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up her arm. She snatched her hand back as if burned. His eyes glinted with a flicker of satisfaction. He had felt it too. He didn't drink the coffee. He simply held it, his gaze sweeping over her one last time before he turned and walked out, the bell chiming his departure. The cafe suddenly felt too big, too empty. The heavy silence he had brought with him lingered in his wake. Lena stared at the 50,001 note on the counter. It was more than she made in half a day. Her practical side screamed at her to just take it, to put it towards her rent. But another part of her, the part that was still vibrating from his touch, saw it for what it was, a claim, a down payment. She snatched the bill, marched to the door, and threw it open. He was just getting into the back of a sleek black sedan that was idling at the curb. "Hey!" she yelled. Julian paused, one foot in the car, and turned. "You forgot your change!" she shouted, holding up the bill. He gave her that same small, infuriating smile. "I never forget anything." Then he got into the car, the door shut with a heavy final thud, and the sedan pulled silently into traffic, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Lena stood on the sidewalk, the bill clutched in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was not the end. It was the beginning of something she wasn't sure she was strong enough to survive. Julian settled back against the plush leather of the car. He lifted the coffee cup not to drink, but to inhale its scent. It smelled of her, faintly of soap and something sweet, like cinnamon. He closed his eyes, replaying the encounter. Her defiance was like a drug. In his world, people deferred, they bowed, they agreed. No one had spoken to him like that in years. She had looked at him not as Julian Cho, head of the Cheongyang syndicate, but as an arrogant customer. It was intoxicating. "Marcus," he said, his voice calm, belying the storm raging inside him. His second in command, a man with a bulldog's build and a scholar's mind, sat in the passenger seat. He turned, his expression professionally blank. "Sir?" "The woman in that cafe, Lena Park." Marcus didn't ask how he knew her name. He knew Julian had likely seen it on her name tag. Or he simply assumed Julian's information network was already at work. "Yes, sir." "I want to know everything about her," Julian commanded. "Her address, her family, her school, her debts, her dreams. Everything. And I want it on my desk by morning." "Understood." Marcus didn't bat an eye. He was used to his boss's sudden, inexplicable commands. But he had never heard this tone in Julian's voice before. It wasn't the cold command of business. It was something else, something raw and personal. "And Marcus," Julian added, opening his eyes and staring at the city blurring past the tinted window. "Ensure she is protected. From a distance. No one is to approach her. No one is to cause her trouble. If a gust of wind blows too hard in her direction, I want to know who sent it." A flicker of surprise crossed Marcus's face before he suppressed it. "It will be done, sir." Julian leaned his head back and finally took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter, slightly burnt. The worst he'd ever had. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. The next day, a file 2 inches thick sat on Julian's desk. Lena Park, 24 years old, orphaned father, estranged mother living in Busan, student at Hongik University, night classes, double shifts at the Daily Grind Cafe, outstanding student loans, an application for a prestigious design internship recently rejected, a dream of opening her own small design studio. Her life was an open book, a testament to struggle and resilience. Reading it, Julian felt a strange mix of protectiveness and shame. His power gave him the ability to peel back the layers of her privacy with unnerving ease. The knowledge felt like a violation, but it also solidified his resolve. Her world was precarious. He could make it safe. She fought for every scrap, He could give her an empire. He began his pursuit not with a flood, but with a gentle rain. The next day, Lena arrived at work to find that the cafe's perpetually broken air conditioner was being replaced by a brand new, top-of-the-line unit. Her boss, Mr. Kim, was ecstatic. "Some anonymous benefactor," he'd declared. "A loyal customer who wanted to improve the place." Lena felt a cold dread. She knew. A week later, she received a letter from the university. A new anonymous scholarship had been created for promising graphic design students with financial need. She was the first recipient. It covered her entire remaining tuition. She stood in her cramped apartment, the letter shaking in her hand, feeling not gratitude, but a sense of being trapped. The walls felt like they were closing in. He was everywhere and nowhere. She would sometimes feel a prickling on the back of her neck, the sensation of being watched, and would turn to see nothing but a crowd of indifferent faces. But she knew he was there, a ghost pulling strings from a world she couldn't see. Her best friend and roommate, Chloe, was less suspicious. "Lena, this is amazing," she'd said, grabbing the scholarship letter. "This is your big break. Who cares where it came from? It's a miracle." "It's not a miracle, Chloe. It's him," Lena had whispered, the words tasting like poison. "Him who? The handsome, terrifying suit guy from the cafe? You've seen him once. You're being paranoid." "Am I?" Lena retorted. "First the AC, now this. It's creepy. It's like he's buying his way into my life. Maybe he's just trying to be nice." "People like him aren't nice," Lena said, a bitter certainty in her voice. "They're investors. He said it himself. They don't give gifts. They buy assets." She tried to ignore it. She tried to convince herself it was all a coincidence. But then he appeared again, 2 weeks after their first meeting. He walked into the cafe just as she was closing up. The sun had set, and the streetlights cast long shadows into the empty room. Her heart leaped into her throat. "We're closed." "I know," Julian said, his voice soft. He stopped a few feet away, holding a large, flat portfolio. "I came to see you." "This is my place of work. It's not appropriate." She clutched a damp rag in her hand like a weapon. "Then where is appropriate, Lena?" he asked, using her name for the first time. It sounded both foreign and intimate on his lips. "A park? A restaurant? You tell me the place, and I will be there." "The appropriate place is nowhere," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I want you to leave me alone. I don't want your money. I don't want your scholarships or your air conditioners." He absorbed her anger with that infuriating calm. "The scholarship was meant to give you freedom, not to cage you. You have talent. It deserves to be nurtured, not suffocated by financial burdens." He took a step closer, placing the portfolio on the counter. "I know you were rejected for the Shinhan Group internship." Lena flinched as if he had struck her. The rejection had been a private, bitter disappointment. Hearing it from him felt like he had read her diary. How do you know that?" "I told you. I never forget anything." He slid the portfolio across the counter towards her. "This is a counteroffer." Warily, she opened it. Inside were sleek, professional branding proposals for a new luxury hotel chain. The designs were breathtaking, innovative, and exactly in the style she dreamed of creating. At the bottom of the first page was a contract. It offered her a position as lead graphic designer for the project. The salary listed was an astronomical figure, more than she could hope to earn in a decade. The client was a subsidiary of Cho Holdings, his company. She slammed the portfolio shut. "No." "Why?" His voice was genuinely curious. "Because I don't want to be one of your projects," she burst out, the words tumbling out in a torrent of frustration and fear. "I don't want to be a pet you pamper or a charity case you fix. My life is mine. It's messy and it's hard, but it's mine. I will not be bought." He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. The intensity was back, but it was different now. It was tinged with something that looked like respect, or maybe even hurt. "This isn't about buying you, Lena," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is about believing in you. The world should see your talent. I just want to be the one to open the door." "Find someone else to open doors for," she said, pushing the portfolio back at him. "I'll kick my own down. Thank you very much." He didn't take it. He left it on the counter between them, a silent challenge. "The offer stands. It will not be rescinded." He looked at her, and for a fleeting second, the armor cracked. She saw a flicker of raw, aching loneliness in his eyes, a profound solitude that mirrored her own in a strange way. "Just have dinner with me," he said, the command in his voice replaced by a plea. "One dinner. No talk of business or money. Just talk. If, after that, you still want me to leave you alone, I will." It was the vulnerability that did it, the crack in the facade. She saw the man, not the monolith. Against her better judgment, every alarm in her body screaming retreat, she heard herself say, "Fine. One dinner." His relief was palpable, a subtle softening of his entire posture. "Tomorrow night. I'll pick you up at 8. "I'll meet you there," she countered, clinging to one last shred of control. "Text me the address." He nodded, a small concessionary bow of his head. "Tomorrow." He left, and Lena sank onto a stool, her legs suddenly weak. The portfolio sat on the counter, a gleaming black promise of a world she had just been invited into. She had a terrible feeling that she had just agreed to far more than just a meal. She had agreed to a first step on a path from which there might be no return. The restaurant was perched on the top floor of a skyscraper, its windows offering a panoramic view of Seoul's glittering expanse. It was the kind of place Lena had only ever seen in dramas, impossibly elegant and intimidatingly quiet. She had worn her one good dress, a simple black sheath that Chloe had insisted she buy, and she still felt like an imposter. Julian was already there, seated at a secluded corner table. He stood when she approached. He had forgone a tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. The casual change made him seem younger, more accessible, and somehow even more handsome. "You came," he said, a genuine smile reaching his eyes for the first time. It transformed his face, chasing away the shadows. The effect was dazzling. "I keep my promises," she said, trying to sound nonchalant as he held her chair for her. The dinner was a surprise. He kept his word. He didn't mention the job, the scholarship, or her finances. Instead, he asked her about her classes, about her passion for design, about the sketches he'd seen in the cafe. He listened, truly listened, with an attentiveness that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. She found herself relaxing, opening up in a way she rarely did. She talked about her dream of creating designs that were both beautiful and functional, of telling stories through color and shape. He spoke of his own life, but in vague, careful terms. He talked about the burden of a family legacy, the weight of expectations. He didn't mention what that legacy was, but Lena could feel the immense pressure he lived under. She saw the loneliness in him again, a vast, empty space that all his money and power could not fill. "Why me?" she asked suddenly, the question hanging in the air between them. "Out of all the people in this city, why did you walk into my cafe? Why are you doing all this?" Julian put down his fork, his expression turning serious. He looked at her, his gaze so direct it felt like he was peering into her soul. "I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who want something from me, my money, my influence, my name. They see the position, not the man. They smile when they should be terrified, and they flatter when they should be honest." He leaned forward slightly. "When I walked into your cafe and you looked at me, you didn't see any of that. You saw a man who was annoying you. You weren't afraid. You weren't impressed. You were just real. It was like taking a breath of fresh air after being locked in a sealed room for my entire life." His honesty disarmed her. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. This wasn't the arrogant tycoon she had first imagined. This was a man trapped in a gilded cage, reaching through the bars for a moment of genuine human connection. After dinner, he walked her to the street to get a cab. The air was cool and the city hummed around them. "I meant what I said, Lena," he said, his voice low as a taxi pulled up. "If you want me to disappear from your life, I will." She looked at him, at his handsome face etched with a tension that spoke of a life lived on a knife's edge, at the hope and vulnerability warring in his dark eyes. The thought of never seeing him again, of returning to her grayscale life, sent a sharp, unexpected pang of loss through her. I don't want you to disappear," she admitted, the words barely a whisper. "But I want to do this on my terms. No more gifts, no more pulling strings. Just just you and me." A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face. "Your terms," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever they are." He opened the taxi door for her. As she got in, his hand brushed hers, and this time she didn't pull away. The spark was still there, a warm current that spread through her entire body. As the taxi pulled away, Lena watched his reflection in the side mirror until he was just a speck in the glittering city. She had laid down her terms, believing she could control the pace, the boundaries. She didn't yet understand that for a man like Julian Cho, a single concession was a total victory. He had been given an inch, and he had every intention of taking her entire world. Their courtship was a strange dance between two different universes. Julian would leave his world of high-stakes meetings and shadowy obligations to enter hers. They ate tteokbokki from street stalls, he in his $1,000 suit, looking completely out of place and yet perfectly comfortable as long as he was with her. They went for long walks along the Han River, talking for hours. He never pushed, never rushed. He simply made time for her, carving out pieces of his life and offering them to her. Lena found herself falling. She fell for the way his eyes would soften when she talked about her art, for the surprising dryness of his wit, for the quiet, fierce way he would watch over her, ensuring her safety without being overt. One evening, as they sat on a bench watching the river, she shivered in the breeze. Without a word, he took off his suit jacket, a garment that probably had its own security detail, and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled of him, a clean, expensive scent of sandalwood and power. In that moment, wrapped in his warmth, she felt safer than she had in her entire life. But the shadows were always there, at the edges. His phone would ring with calls he would take in hushed, sharp tones, his entire demeanor shifting into the cold, decisive leader she knew he was. Men in dark suits would sometimes be visible in the distance, their presence a silent testament to his importance and the danger that necessitated them. Paragraph. She tried not to ask. She was afraid of the answer. She clung to the man he was with her, the gentle, attentive Julian, and tried to ignore the other one, the kingpin who moved in a world of secrets. One night, he took her back to his penthouse. The place was vast and sterile, more art gallery than home, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the entire city. It was beautiful, but it was lonely. It was the gilded cage she had imagined. He stood behind her as she looked out at the view. "All of this," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "It means nothing without you in it." She turned to face him. The space between them crackled with a tension that had been building for weeks. He slowly raised a hand, his fingers gently tracing the smudge of charcoal that was, as usual, on her cheek. His touch was feather-light, reverent. "Lena," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a kiss of desperation, of starvation, a raw outpouring of all the feelings he had kept locked away. It was a kiss that claimed her, branded her, and promised her everything. Lena's resistance melted away. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, surrendering to the inevitable, to the man she had, against all odds, fallen in love with. That night, she stayed. In the quiet darkness of his massive bedroom, wrapped in his arms, she felt a sense of belonging that was both terrifying and wonderful. She traced the lines of the intricate dragon tattoo that coiled around his arm and up his shoulder, its scales disappearing under his skin. It was beautiful and menacing, just like him. She ran her finger over the thin scar on his eyebrow. "How did you get this?" she whispered. He tensed slightly. "A childhood disagreement." His tone was light, but his eyes were dark with memories he wouldn't share. "Julian," she said, her voice serious, "I need to know. I can't keep living in the light while you're standing in the shadows. What is it that you do? What is this family legacy?" He was silent for a long time, his jaw tight. He looked at her, and she saw a profound sadness in his eyes. He was making a choice. "My family," he began, his voice low and heavy, "doesn't run a simple import-export business, Lena. We are the Cheongnyong Syndicate. My grandfather built an empire on the docks of Busan after the war. It was a different time. They controlled unions, logistics, and anything that moved in or out of the port, legally or otherwise. My father expanded it, and now it's mine." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. Syndicate, the Korean Mafia, the polite euphemisms he had used, family business, legacy, were stripped away, revealing the ugly truth beneath. The men in suits weren't just bodyguards, they were soldiers. The hushed phone calls weren't about stock prices, they were about territory and enforcement. The wealth that had so intimidated and intrigued her was built on a foundation of crime, violence, and fear. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. She pulled away from him, scrambling to sit up, clutching the silk sheet to her chest. The warmth of a moment ago was gone, replaced by an icy dread. "You're a gangster?" The word sounded absurd, like something from a movie, but looking at the hard set of his jaw, the haunted look in his eyes, she knew it was real. "I am the head of my family," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was a statement of fact, not a boast or an apology. "It is the only life I have ever known. I was born into it. I did not choose it." "But you live it now," she cried, her voice rising with a mix of horror and betrayal. "You make choices every day. The money you used for my scholarship, where did it come from? The power you used to find out about my life, how did you get it?" "Does it matter where it came from if it did good?" he asked, his voice raw. "Yes!" she shouted, tears welling in her eyes. "Of course it matters. It's all built on the suffering of others, on intimidation and God knows what else." The image of the scar on his eyebrow flashed in her mind. A childhood disagreement. What did that even mean in his world? "I have tried to change things," he said, his voice pleading. "Since my father's death, I have been moving our interests toward legitimate enterprises. The hotel project I offered you, it's real. It's clean. I am trying to build something that can last, something that isn't tainted by the past. But it's not that simple. There are factions, old guards who resist change. My uncle—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "So you're a criminal who wants to be a businessman?" she said, the words dripping with sarcasm born of pain. "I'm sorry, but you don't get to have it both ways." "Lena, please," he said, reaching for her. She flinched away from his touch. Don't touch me." His hand dropped. The hurt on his face was so profound, it was like a physical wound. He looked utterly broken. "I love you," he whispered, the confession torn from the deepest part of him. "I have never said that to anyone. Loving you is the only truly clean thing in my entire life." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She loved him too. That was the terrible, tragic truth of it. She loved this impossible, dangerous man. But love couldn't blind her to what he was. Her principles, her entire sense of right and wrong were screaming at her. To stay with him would be to accept his world, to become complicit in it. She would be that woman in the gilded cage, turning a blind eye to the source of the gold. "I can't," she choked out, the words ripping her apart. "I can't be with you. I can't live in your world, Julian." She stumbled out of the bed, grabbing her clothes with trembling hands. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe. She just had to get away. Away from the penthouse, away from the city lights that now seemed menacing, away from the man whose love felt like a beautiful, deadly poison. He didn't try to stop her. He just sat on the edge of the bed, a powerful king on a lonely throne, watching his entire world walk out the door. As she waited for the elevator, she heard a sound from the apartment, the crash of something heavy, followed by a cry of pure animalistic anguish. It was the sound of a heart breaking. It sounded exactly like her own. The days that followed were a blur of misery. Lena quit her job at the cafe. She couldn't bear to be in the place where she had met him. She dropped her classes. The scholarship money felt dirty now. She stayed in her apartment, a ghost haunting her own life. Chloe tried to comfort her, but there was nothing she could say. How could she explain that she had fallen in love with the head of the Korean Mafia and then had to break her own heart to leave him? Lena felt his presence everywhere. A black sedan was always parked down the street from her apartment. She knew it was his men, watching over her, protecting her. The thought was both comforting and suffocating. She was free, but she was still his prisoner. Julian, meanwhile, was drowning. The penthouse was no longer a symbol of his power. It was a mausoleum of his failure. Her scent lingered in the sheets, a torturous reminder of what he had lost. He threw himself into his work, but the fire was gone. Legitimizing the business no longer felt like a strategic choice. It felt like a desperate penance. His uncle, Jae Wook, a man carved from the old ways, saw his nephew's pain and smelled weakness. "This girl," he said one evening, his voice dripping with disdain as they sat in Julian's office. "This little cafe worker has broken you. She is a liability. You should have taken her as a mistress, enjoyed her, and discarded her. Instead, you tried to put her on a throne." "Do not speak of her," Julian warned, his voice lethally quiet. "She has made you weak," Jae-wook pressed on, enjoying the cruelty. "You talk of legitimate enterprise. You are forgetting who we are. We are Cheongnyeong. We take what we want. We do not ask for it. This sentimentality will be the death of this family. This family is dying because it refuses to evolve," Julian shot back, his control snapping. "Your way of doing things, violence and fear, is a relic. It has no place in the world I intend to build." "The world you build?" Jae-wook laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You build nothing. You are a boy pining for a girl who was smart enough to run from you. You have lost your nerve." The confrontation was the spark Julian needed. The grief in him hardened into resolve. His uncle was right about one thing. He had been pining, but he was wrong about everything else. Lena hadn't made him weak. She had shown him what real strength was. It wasn't about power or control. It was about principle. It was about choosing the right path, no matter how hard. He would not just change his world. He would burn the old one to the ground and build a new one from the ashes. A world that was worthy of her. He made his move. He called a meeting of the syndicate's family heads. With Marcus by his side, he laid out his vision. A complete transition away from all illegal activities within 5 years. He would use their capital to build a corporate empire, a legitimate one. There would be severance for those who wanted out, and new roles for those who wanted in. Jae-wook and his faction openly rebelled. "This is a betrayal of our history, of your father." "My father is dead," Julian said, his voice as cold as steel. "And his ways died with him. This is the new Cheongnyeong. You are either with me, or you are against me. There is no middle ground." It was a declaration of war. While Julian was fighting for his future, Lena was trying to escape her past. She decided she had to leave Seoul altogether. Her mother, who she hadn't spoken to in years, lived in Busan. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a destination. A way out. She used the last of her savings to buy a one-way ticket on the cheapest flight she could find. And so she found herself on that plane, being belittled by a flight attendant, the small cruelty a painful symbol of her new, diminished reality. She was back where she started, alone, struggling, and invisible. The incident did not go unnoticed. One of Julian's men was on the flight, seated a few rows behind her, his orders to watch and report. He made a quiet phone call to Marcus as soon as they landed. Marcus walked into Julian's office. The war with his uncle was taking its toll. Julian looked exhausted but more determined than ever. "There was an incident on the plane," Marcus said, forgoing any preamble. He recounted the story of the flight attendant's behavior towards Lena. Julian's face, already grim, hardened into a mask of cold fury. It wasn't the insult itself that enraged him. It was the symbolism. The world, in its casual cruelty, was kicking a woman who was already down, the woman he loved, a world he had failed to protect her from. He had been fighting his war on a grand scale, moving financial assets and consolidating power. But this small, personal injustice crystallized his purpose. It wasn't enough to change his own world. He had to be able to change hers, to smooth her path, to silence the condescending voices that would judge her. "Which airline was it?" Julian asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Air Dihan, sir, a mid-tier domestic carrier." Julian turned to his computer. His fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up financial reports, stock ownership data, and market valuations. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the quiet clicking of keys. "They're over-leveraged," Julian murmured, more to himself than to Marcus. "Their parent company is vulnerable to a hostile takeover. Get our financial team on the line. I want to start buying up their stock. Quietly at first. Then we make a tender offer they can't refuse. I want controlling interest by the end of the month." Marcus blinked. "Sir, you're going to buy an entire airline? Because a flight attendant was rude to her?" Julian looked up from the screen, and the cold fury in his eyes was blazing. "No," he said. "I'm buying an airline because she deserves to fly first class for the rest of her life and be treated like the queen she is. I'm buying it to prove that my power can be used for more than just breaking things. It can be used to build a fortress for her. Now, get it done." The war for Air Dihan was swift and brutal. Julian's resources, now funneled through legitimate investment channels, were overwhelming. Within 3 weeks, Cho Holdings was the majority shareholder. The news sent ripples through the business world. The old guard of the syndicate saw it as a pointless vanity project. The new guard saw it as a stunning display of legitimate power. Meanwhile, in Busan, Lena was trying to rebuild. She found a small room to rent and a job waitressing at a seaside restaurant. Her relationship with her mother was as strained as ever. The city was different, but the ache in her heart was the same. She missed Julian with a physical intensity that left her breathless at night. 1 month after she had left Seoul, a package arrived for her. It was a simple, elegant box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single first-class plane ticket back to Seoul. Tucked alongside it was a small, handwritten note. "One more dinner. My terms. Please. Jay." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She should have thrown it away. She should have burned it, but she couldn't. The hope she had tried so hard to extinguish flared back to life. She went to the airport on the designated day, feeling like a fool, convinced she was making a terrible mistake. When she presented her ticket at the check-in counter, the agent's eyes widened. "Miss Park," the agent said, her voice filled with awe. "Welcome. We have been expecting you. Please, allow me to escort you to the VIP lounge." Lena was swept through security and into a luxurious private lounge she didn't know existed. The treatment was so different, so deferential, it was disorienting. When it was time to board, she was led onto the plane first. As she walked through the first-class cabin, she saw her, the same flight attendant with the severe haircut. Their eyes met. The attendant's face went pale, a look of pure, unadulterated terror dawning in her eyes as she recognized Lena. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Lena took her seat, a plush leather affair that was more like a small apartment. A moment later, a man in a crisp suit, the head purser, rushed to her side. "Miss Park," he said, bowing deeply. "On behalf of Air Dahan and our new chairman, Mr. Julian Cho, I would like to offer our most sincere apologies for the unacceptable treatment you received on your last flight with us. The employee in question has been reassigned to a role that does not involve customer interaction. Please, if there is anything Anything at all we can do to make your flight more comfortable, you have only to ask." Lena stared at him, stunned into silence. New chairman, Julian Cho. He had bought the entire airline. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the gesture was overwhelming. It was insane. It was terrifying. It was the grandest, most romantic gesture she had ever heard of. It wasn't just about revenge. It was a message. This is what I can do for you. This is the world I can build for you. A world where no one will ever look down on you again. The flight passed in a daze. When she landed in Seoul, he was there. He was waiting for her right at the gate, past the security barriers where no one was allowed to wait. He looked thinner, tired, but his eyes were bright, fixed only on her. She walked towards him, her legs unsteady. The bustling airport, the curious stares of onlookers. It all faded away. There was only him. "You bought an airline," she whispered when she was close enough. "It was a sound investment," he replied, a faint smile on his lips. But his eyes were deadly serious. "Lena, things are different now. I'm different. The war is over. I won. The Cheongyang Syndicate is being dismantled. Cho Holdings is now a fully legitimate global logistics and investment firm. The past is gone. I buried it." "You did all that? In a month?" she asked, her mind reeling. "I was motivated," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He took a hesitant step closer. "I did it for you, to be a man worthy of you, to build a world that was clean enough for you." "I know it's not enough. I know the past will always be there. But the future, our future, it can be whatever we want it to be." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes, all his power, all his wealth, stripped away, leaving only a man, vulnerable and hoping. "Please, Lena, come home." The tears she had been holding back for a month finally fell. They were not tears of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming, earth-shattering love. He had not just moved a mountain for her. He had demolished it and rebuilt it into a kingdom fit for her. She didn't need to say a word. She closed the distance between them and launched herself into his arms, her mouth finding his in a desperate, frantic kiss. It was a kiss of reunion, of forgiveness, of a future finally within reach. He held her tightly as if he would never let her go again, his own tears mingling with hers. The airport, the world, everything ceased to exist. There was only the two of them, two halves of a single soul, finally reunited, finally home. The love between Julian and Lena proves that true change is not only possible, but is often driven by the purest of motivations. It suggests that a person's past does not have to define their future, and that even someone from a world of darkness can find redemption by striving to become worthy of the light that love brings into their life. It is a story about the transformative power of love to inspire profound and meaningful change. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If this story moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel for more tales of dramatic romance, and sharing this video with someone who believes in the power of a grand gesture. What did you think of Julian's decision to buy the airline? Was it a romantic gesture or an extreme abuse of power? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for our next story, we want you to choose. Should we tell the story of Marcus, Julian's loyal second-in-command, as he finds an unexpected love of his own? Or would you rather hear about Chloe, Lena's best friend, and her journey to becoming a successful designer? Vote now in the poll. We can't wait to see you in the next story.